Welcome to Intuitive Transformations with your host, Sylvia Henderson, and discover tools, wisdom, and inspiration that will empower you to transform your life. Sylvia is an intuitive life coach and energy healer with a growing practice that is focused on empowering others to be more of who they want to be. For the next hour, join Sylvia and explore and unravel anything in the way of you creating the life that you would love to live on the OMTimes radio network.
Hello and welcome to the Intuitive Transformations radio show, where you will find tools you can use to change and transform your life. This is Sylvia Henderson, your host, and I'm here live every Sunday evening at 6 p.m. Pacific Time and 9 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, the voice of consciousness. If you would like to know more about me and what I do, please check out my website at intuitivetransformations.net, just like the name of the show, intuitivetransformations.net. Just about everything you'd ever want to know about me is right there. And you can also sign up for my newsletter or book a complimentary 15-minute session and send me an email just to say hello, because I'd love to hear from you. And I just want you to know, too, that this show is really something that's near and dear to my heart. It's my heart's desire to support and connect with as many people as I possibly can to equip and empower others to awaken and to own the greatness that we all possess within us. I mean, that's really why I created the Intuitive Transformations radio show. And this is why I focus the show on providing tools that you can use to transform and improve your life, because I know that's what so many of us want. It's something I wanted. It's the show that I wish I had available for me when I was trying to make my life a lot easier than it was. And I hope that I'm able to do that for you through this show. I created this show with the intention of connecting with creative and conscious minds on a soul-to-soul level, and to share valuable information and resources that will inspire you to step into more of who you truly are, so that you can expand more boldly into what you love and desire to experience in your life. I know that envisioning a planet where we can all improve our lives and where we all stop arguing for our limitations and our shortcomings and stop arguing for the limitations of others, I know that's a pretty tall order. But I also know that there are those of you listening who also want the same exact things. Even today on the internet, it's ablaze with conversations and predictions about the blood red moon that we will experience this evening. Some people are anticipating fearful events, and some are anticipating love-filled events. Personally, I'm leaning toward the latter, because I believe that mankind's original design and template is to expand into more of its original invisible form, which is divine love. However, I also know it can be challenging to maintain a vision of hopefulness, especially if you happen to watch the evening news or read a newspaper every once in a while. And social media is not much better, I have to say. I mean, no longer are we just finding videos of playful kittens and puppies and smiling babies. I'm not sure of what the statistics are, but I know I've personally noticed a steep increase in traumatizing news in my social media feeds. In today's world of cell phones and instant communication forms from around the globe, it is getting increasingly difficult to avoid the constant exposure to traumatizing news and world events. And let's face it, how many people do you actually know that have never had or experienced an emotional stress or trauma in their lives? My guess is that that number is either extremely low or it's a zero. And unfortunately, we are not given many options to deal with the aftermath of trauma and stress in our lives. in societies where modern medicine promotes medication over meditation, anti-anxiety and antidepressant pill sales have skyrocketed. According to a 2013 New York Times article, over 30 million people in the United States alone are on daily antidepressants. And believe me, I completely understand. There's no judgment about that. It's just that this is the way it is. If you need to take an antidepressant, then you need to take an antidepressant. But what if there were some other options available? What if we had something else that we could choose that didn't have the extreme side effects that are associated with prescription medications? This is why I'm so happy to have Dr. David Berceli join me today to talk about his revolutionary process called the Trauma Release Exercises, or TRE. And this is very interesting, and it's going to be very novel and unique for many of you to hear this for the first time. But this process actually allows you to activate natural tremors within your physical body that release stored tension from stress and old traumas. And I believe that in today's show, there is going to be a tremendous wealth of information for you. It's going to be a gift that you'll be able to take some next steps and learn more about this and be able to integrate this into your life. And I hope that you'll also share it with those that you know and love so that they can benefit from this information as well. If you want to share this show, you just go to the show bio page, and at the bottom, you just click on share. You can email it, you can post it on Facebook, and you can tweet about it. But people need to know that there's something else available, and we're going to talk about that today. Before I bring Dr. David Berceli on, let me tell you a little bit about this gentleman so that he can talk to us about this beautiful process that is effective, portable, easy to learn, not expensive, and that you can use in the comfort of your own home. Dr. Berceli is the founder and CEO of Trauma Recovery Assessment and Prevention Services. He has lived and worked in war-torn countries around the continent of Africa and the Middle East. Along with individual trauma counseling, he has provided specialized trauma recovery assistance to U.S. military personnel, national and international relief agencies, and government and non-government organizations whose staff are living and working in trauma-inducing environments. Dr. Berceli's book, The Revolutionary Trauma Release Process, Transcend Your Toughest Times, and his newest book, Shake It Off Naturally, Reduce Stress, Anxiety, and Tension with TRE, show what stress, anxiety, and trauma do to our mental well-being and physical health, and offer an easy and effective solution. Dr. Berceli is a clinical social worker with a PhD, licensed massage therapist, certified bioenergetics therapist, certified field traumatologist, and a spiritual director. Dr. Berceli, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. It's very fun and nice to be with you.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you here because this is a process that I learned about 3 years ago while listening to you on a teleseminar. And I was a practicing massage therapist at the time, and I knew that from my experience in massage that physical trauma can be stored on a cellular level and in the tissues of the body. And what you had to say made so much sense. And I know I took quite a bit of time just in the intro, but can you just briefly explain to people that are listening and hearing about your process for the first time, how did you come to create this, and how did you come to the awareness that having these natural traumas, which we didn't even know was natural until your book, would help us release stress out of our body?
It's a little bit simple, actually, because I think everybody in the world saw what I saw. I just asked a different question. When I was living in some countries in war in both Africa and the Middle East, I often saw people tremor out of terror or fear or anxiety. So the body, I saw it tremoring all the time. And from my clinical training, I had assumed that the tremoring was part of the dysfunction of the nervous system and that it was overwhelmed. And as I began to watch people tremor, I began to realize that the tremoring response, if it was allowed to play itself out to its end, actually had a relaxation response to the person. And so I began to ask the question, is the tremor mechanism, although it's directly associated with a high aroused nervous state, could it actually be part of the healing process of the nervous system rather than part of the pathological process of the nervous system? And when I just shifted asking the question, does the tremor mechanism have potential rather than is it some sign of a dysfunction, then I began to work and play with it and realize that the tremor mechanism itself is part of the parasympathetic nervous system that calms the person down. That's why it is activated when a person is under stress or anxiety, not because it's part of the pathology of the stress response. It's actually the body trying to calm itself down.
Now that is fascinating because you even mentioned before you started that conversation about unlike how you had been trained. And so there had been training before that this was part of the symptomatology of stress. It was part of the stress response versus the calming effect that you later discovered.
Right. If you look in the diagnostic manual, which we use as clinicians, which is published by the American Psychological Association, every post-trauma stress disorder that's represented in there, and they talk about one of the indicators is you ask the client if they are tremoring or shaking. If they respond yes, then it was seen as a clinical part of the clinical diagnosis of diagnosing them with some type of trauma.
Wow. So, Dr. Berceli, we're going to continue this thought about tremors and what they represent right after we get back from the break.
Perfect.
Everyone, please stay tuned. We'll be back in just a moment. You do not want to miss this. You're going to really benefit from this conversation today.
Feed your soul with waves of consciousness on OMTimes Radio. Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Hey ladies, do you want to have that good hair day feeling all the time? Gentlemen, would you want your special someone to have that glow, letting you know she's feeling completely satisfied? This feeling and that glow can be yours by embracing your sexual power. So join me, Rachel Kenley, award-winning romance author, on the O-Spot. The O-Spot will guide you to that peak with guest interviews, book discussions, and conversations on the thrills of sexual empowerment. Put the zing back in your life. Come up and see me sometime on the O-Spot, live on Hump Day at 10 p.m. Eastern.
Hello, I'm Miriam Knight of New Consciousness Review, inviting you to my new show where I interview the rising stars of the conscious awakening. We'll explore the many faces of consciousness in action and intriguing perspectives on life, the universe, and everything in between. Join us each Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern on the Rising Stars Show.
What if business could be fun? What if business is the adventure of living? What are you choosing? Where do you do business that makes it easier, more fun, or more joyful for you? We'd love to see where you do business. Connect with us on Instagram at Joy of Business or Twitter at Joy of Business. And share your pictures with hashtags BusinessDoneWhere and Joy of Business. Let's change the world with business. The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
Welcome back. This is Sylvia Henderson here, and I have Dr. David Berceli joining me today talking about his process, which is revolutionary, at least I personally think so, called the trauma release exercises, TRE, which is the trauma release process. And so before we went into the break, Dr. Berceli was sharing how he discovered the process of eliciting these tremors as being very soothing and creating a parasympathetic effect, which is the calming part of our neurology, versus our sympathetic, which is more fight, flight, and freeze, by asking a different question, because previously it had been determined that tremors were part of the diagnostic evidence that someone was in a stressful state. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
Okay, good. I want to make sure that I really could deliver that as well as you did. So can you go a little bit further into, okay, so you discovered that tremors are part of the parasympathetic process, actually part of the calming effect. But how did you come across these exercises that would create these tremors in a contrived manner?
Well, I actually, because I have some training in body psychotherapy with bioenergetic analysis, and because of my anatomy background as a massage therapist, I began looking at the muscle structure to figure out what would be the easiest way to both slightly fatigue the muscles and stretch them. Because if we're under stress, basically we all know that our body tightens up. So a way of helping the body to release physically was to stretch the muscles gently and then to slightly fatigue them, and then they begin to tremor naturally. So it wasn't too complicated when you understood anatomy. And two basic sort of ways of thinking about this, Sylvia. If you're out in the gym and you start to lift weights and the weight is too heavy, your arms will begin to shake. And they're shaking because they're just basically an anatomical indicator that's telling you, look, that's too heavy, you have to stop it because I'm overwhelmed. Well, it's the same sort of principle when you're at a high level of stress, the body begins to shake as well, because it's basically saying, look, you're contracting too much, the sympathetic nervous system is too high, I have to start tremoring so I can calm myself down, or my muscles are going to contract too much. But what's interesting too, Sylvia, about it is that this happens on even happy occasions. Because if you're about to get married and you're going to walk down the aisle, you could feel your hand shaking, or your legs are shaking, or your voice could be quivering. All of those indicators of the body saying, I'm overexcited. It's not saying that the excitement is from a good or a bad stimulation. It's just saying the nervous system is overexcited. So for the body, it's purely neutral. It's saying, I'm overcharged. I'm going to shake myself so I can start to calm myself down.
That's fascinating. So then are you saying then that trauma is a form of being overexcited, or just in that case, you were using that as an example?
No, that's exactly what it is. Trauma is nothing but an overactivation of the neurophysiology, the nervous system, and it's for what you had said, it helps to create the fight-flight response or the freeze and dissociation response. Whatever the body needs to survive the stressor or the danger, it will overstimulate itself in order to do that. Now, here's where our problem is, and this is where post-traumatic stress disorder occurs. The body becomes overstimulated, very hypercharged, and then after the event is over, usually you'll hear people say, oh, I was shaking so bad I had to calm down my nerves. So they'll either have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, or they might drink alcohol, or they might take some sort of pill to calm their nerves down. And what they don't realize is that the shaking mechanism itself was already the body successfully starting to calm itself down. And if they simply had allowed itself to play itself through to the end, the shaking would have actually completed itself, and the body would have gone through the full cycle of a high aroused charge. The parasympathetic nervous system of the tremor mechanism would have activated. And if they let it activate to its completion, it would have brought them back down to their calm state again.
You know, I'm really glad that you said that, because I think in our society, when we see someone shaking after an experience that's a shocker, a traumatic experience, we associate that with oh, they must be in shock.
Exactly right. And shock is completely different from just a tremor mechanism. When I work with policemen and firemen and EMTs, this happens all the time. My first question is, when you arrived on the scene, did you see anybody shaking? Yes, they always say, of course, we see it all the time. Mm. What do you do with that? Well, we usually put a blanket around them and we treat them for shock. But that doesn't mean they're necessarily going into shock. They're just tremoring. Because shock has an entirely different set of symptoms to it than just a tremor mechanism being activated.
So the other thing that you just mentioned a little bit earlier before you answered that question about us associating shock with tremoring is PTSD. So I think there's a lot of confusion for the general populace what PTSD is, other than, 4 letters that we form into an acronym, post-traumatic stress disorder. But, and most people think of PTSD, they think of a war vet. Mm-hmm. Or someone who, a 9/11 survivor. Right. So can you speak a little bit about PTSD? Because I have found, even within myself and with working with clients, that you don't have to have that kind of a trauma to have PTSD.
No, I think post-traumatic stress disorder is completely common to the human person in many different circumstances. Here's a simple way to think of it. You have some sort of stressful or traumatic event. Post-trauma or post-traumatic stress means that the psycho-emotional element of the trauma is continuing after the event is over. So a very common one would be a divorce. Maybe you go through divorce and it's 3 or 4 years and it's difficult and you have problems with it. Then 2 years after the divorce is over. You're completely safe. You're living your new life again, but you're still having psycho-emotional reactions that are attributed to the divorce. Now the divorce is over, but you're still having a reaction to it. A car accident would be another thing. You're in a car accident today. It's a red car. But 3 months from now, every time you see a red car, you break out into a sweat, you get frightened, and you can't drive anymore because you feel unsafe. Well, that's a post-trauma stressor. So really, post-traumatic stress disorder is anything that's continuing to affect you psycho-emotionally or physiologically after the stressor is over. It shouldn't be continuing to affect you, and that's why it's considered post-traumatic stress.
I find it very funny that you chose divorce, because when I found you in 2012, it was almost 3 years after a very difficult divorce that I had experienced. And also another, I want to say, 4 years after having to place my 2 autistic sons into a group home because they were so aggressive. Mm-hmm. And then just even dealing from, raising 2 children who had a lot of aggressive behavior and maladaptive behavior. That's why when I heard you, I was like, oh my God, I have got to try this. And so I went on your website as you had recommended at that time, and I purchased your book and I purchased the DVD of the same title, because mm-hmm. you have this brilliant DVD that walks people through how to do the exercises and also what to experience as they're tremoring. And when it arrived, I tore open the DVD, I put it in the player, I did the exercises, and it was the most unique thing I had ever experienced, was this uncontrollable shaking that was mostly around my torso and in my legs, but then it became waves, and it was something in my mind, my conscious mind was trying to figure out, am I doing this, or am I making this, how is this, how is this happening?
Right.
But the beautiful end result was how calm I felt. And there were tears that came out, stuff that I think I had not expressed, obviously,
right,
that came out as a result. And this was, it didn't even take that long. And I was tired afterwards. I guess, I don't know what that effect is, that you're tired after it sometimes. Mm-hmm. Maybe I was just holding on to this so tightly within my tension in my body, and it finally just let go. But I was amazed. I mean, it really is kind of weird and unique the first time you do it, but my goodness, it's really very effective.
That's funny that you speak that way because almost everybody does. We're actually stunned and shocked that our body can do things by itself.
Totally.
Quite frankly, can heal itself if we understand the neurophysiology of how it's trying to work itself back into a calm and comfortable state. So that's why it's kind of easy to activate the tremor mechanism. Although it's weird to our ego and it's confusing to us because we've never been trained to do it, your body knows exactly what you're doing. It knows exactly why it's doing, and it completely loves it. Because it's really just saying, oh, finally, you're letting me shake this out so we can get rid of this trauma and move on with life. And you're right about saying, well, I had some emotions come up. Well, the only reason there's emotions coming up is because they're still unresolved and they've still been held in. That's usually when the diaphragm releases. And then you say, I was tired afterwards. That's wonderful. Because just think of squeezing your body for years and holding it tightly squeezed. Finally, the tremor mechanism activates. It gets a chance to let go of all the squeezing, and your body goes, oh, I'm exhausted. I've been holding on to that for years.
Isn't that something? And the great thing is that when you're done, there's such a stillness in the body.
Yes, exactly. The human organism finally just had a chance to calm down, and it loves that state.
And, I just cannot imagine how this would be helpful for people who have digestive issues from tension and stress.
Very, very good. A lot of irritable bowel syndrome or constipation, ulcers, all those things are from such tight squeezing in the gastrointestinal tract that the blood flow gets completely disrupted. And then, of course, you start to have secondary and tertiary medical problems. And this can really resolve a lot of that.
Well, that is really exciting news. So when we return in just a moment after the break, we're going to continue this beautiful conversation with Dr. David Berceli as we talk about the revolutionary trauma release exercises and his books, Shake It Off Naturally, and the revolutionary trauma release exercises. We'll be back in just a moment.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM. Host your show on IOM-FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM-FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
Are you ready to shift your energy, consciousness, and limiting beliefs? Join me, Shefali Burns, every Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern on Shifting with Shefali here on OMTimes Radio. Shift the blocks, limitations, and negative energies that have kept you from experiencing a life filled with joy, peace, love, abundance, and happiness. Are you ready to shift with Shefali? Are you ready to shine your brilliance?
Time to read that inspiring book or that blog post you've been meaning to get to? In your busy world, how do you improve yourself and keep your life going? I'm Lisa Kay, and my Between Heaven and Earth radio show can transform your life just by listening. Be uplifted with inspiring topics, positive stories, and ideas that really work. Between Heaven and Earth radio is conscious living for your soul every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Have you ever wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free today at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake. Free your mind. Expand your soul. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
Welcome back, everyone. Before we went into the break, I just want to apologize because I'm looking at three different things here. Dr. Berceli has this fantastic DVD, and the DVD is called The Revolutionary Trauma Release Exercises, Transcend Your Toughest Times. Then he has this phenomenal book, The Revolutionary Trauma Release Process, Transcend Your Toughest Times. And then his newest book, which is really a clinical guidebook. And this is something you can take into your physician, and there's evidence and there's research that's been done, and it's called Shake It Off Naturally, Reduce Stress, Anxiety, and Tension with TRE. And this is a beautiful book for someone to have in their office if they're a professional or in the medical field. But for those of you listening, if you want to apply this into your everyday life, then definitely get the DVD, The Revolutionary Trauma Release Exercises, as well as the book, because together they'll give you wonderful working knowledge of how to use this and how to use this quickly. And as I said, when I got my DVD, I just tore it open, stuck it in the player, and did the exercises, and I had beautiful tremors that were very therapeutic, and I felt amazing afterwards. You know, we live in a world where we're just so chronically stressed and overwhelmed. There's just so much going on, and it's this uncertainty of what's going to happen next. Or, you know, people are struggling in their finances and seeing their loved ones be ill or ill themselves. And so, Dr. Berceli, is there any limitation to the age of someone using this or physical ability? Because I know you do have some adaptive exercises.
Yeah, the age limit is not at all a hindrance, because I have people in their 80s and 90s using it. But what I tell them to do if they have physical limitations, as an example, they can actually short-circuit the entire exercise routine to just do the last exercise, because some of them have weak knees or maybe hip replacements and they're not so flexible any longer. But they could lay down in bed. For the elderly, as an example, I just have them lay in their bed and do the last exercise, which is the one where you lay on the floor, and they can usually activate the tremors very easily because their body is already slightly weakened, and so then it can tremor quite easily. So that one's okay. The only other caution that I would have is if people are feeling very raw and vulnerable from some type of psycho-emotional stressors or traumas, they might want to do it in the care of someone that they feel close and safe with, or maybe even with a professional, because they might have some emotional releases that they need to have somebody witness or talk to them about it. Other than that, it is relatively quite safe for the majority of the population.
I see. And so the exercises that stress these muscles and stretch these muscles tend to be in the lower body.
Right. Because what I did was I sort of segmented the body. The first one is for the feet and ankles. The second one is for the calf muscles in the lower part of the legs. The third and fourth one are for the quads and the adductors in the upper part of the legs. And then the last two are for the psoas muscle that's located in the pelvis and the hips.
So there's a lot of information, even on a spiritual level, about the psoas muscle. And I know the psoas muscle can attribute to low back issues. It's a key player, isn't it?
It's remarkably essential to the human body. The psoas muscles are the only set of muscles, there are two of them on each side of the legs, and they connect the legs with the pelvis and then the trunk of the body. They connect into the lumbar, or the vertebrae and the base of the spine. They're the only muscles that connect all three important sections of the body. So they're extremely important. And what's interesting is they're located in the front of the spine. But if the psoas muscle is overcontracted, people will get the sensation of lower back pains in the back of the spine, but it's actually the front of the spine that's overcontracted.
That's really interesting. It's not where the symptoms occurring necessarily, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah. So I also have a question about, there were several stories in your first book, and there was one that really jumped out to me, and it was about a nun who had shared that before she had these traumatic experiences in a war-torn environment, she could pray to God easily. But then after having had experienced what she had witnessed and what she had been through, she could no longer find a way to connect on a spiritual level with God. And in your book, you talk about how that tends to, when people have that level of trauma, that it's like there's a numbness or a disconnection that happens, and that's not very uncommon.
No, actually, it's very common. That's one of the reasons I have my degree in theology, is I was quite curious how human beings would go through a traumatic event that was purely physical, maybe a car accident as an example, and they would either lose their belief system or they would intensify their belief system. So let's just use Christianity as a simple example, but this is every belief system I found around the world. People will say, I was in the car accident, maybe my son was killed in the accident, I've hated God ever since. Well, that was curious to me. Other people, their son might have been killed in it, and they say, I have embraced my faith even more, and I pray to God even harder. And so I became curious, why do events in life cause us to shift, sometimes quite radically, a belief system about our God or our deity or our place in the world? And what's important about this is I discovered unless the person can bring some type of reconciliation around that disturbed belief system, they will continue to stay psycho-emotionally disturbed for years.
And that's where that additional assistance and support and help comes in very handy, I'm sure.
Right, because you try to help the person make sense of that experience that is senseless.
Yeah. So is it a disconnection from their spirituality, or is it kind of a disconnection from life or self? Which one do you?
It's actually all of them. Think of it this way, and I don't want to make it just purely medical and anatomical, but in many ways it is. Our belief system is a neural network as well as our thoughts, as well as our memories, etc. So all of these neural networks, relationships, etc., they're all interconnected. And if you fracture any one of those, like if you fracture your relationship, like you said, you went through a difficult divorce, well, fracturing that neural network that you had established could have caused you to challenge your spirituality too. Where is God? Why isn't God helping me? Or I have to pray to God more deeply to help me through this process. So that when the neural networks become disrupted in any one of those areas of our life, all of them will be challenged.
Wow. And it doesn't have to be a monumental event. It can also be a chronic chain of events that could create that too, right?
Exactly right. And what's even more common in our societies and around the world are simple accidents. You could fall down and you could break your hip on a ski trip, and you're having fun. All of a sudden you break your hip, and now you no longer can jog. And because you can't jog, you're gaining weight. And this will disrupt your entire sense of self and how you understood yourself to be a healthy human being on the planet and full of life and excitement. And all of a sudden you discover you're very limited.
Right. So how can TRE help in those kinds of situations where people have had their whole belief system about themselves and life and spirituality shift?
Well, that's where you're starting to begin to talk about neurophysiology. So that means the brain, the neurological pathways connecting to the physiology of the body. So when you think of the person, think of it as a human organism, one whole pulsating organism. There's no separation between belief system, psycho-emotional state, or physical state. So since they're all interconnected, we can use that to our advantage. The easiest way to begin the reconnection is to help the person reconnect to the body, because I don't have to deal with the ego yet or the psycho-emotional state. I just have to help start repairing the neurophysiological pathways that are going from the body back to the brain. And if the body starts to re-stimulate itself and it starts to feel excited and healthy again, then that's sending transmitters to the brain that says, oh, we're coming back alive. So it starts everything to go back online again.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, it really kind of turns on its heels the old paradigm of only using talk therapy or psychotherapy. It's
Well,
like it allows the body to do what it's designed to do, which is to help to heal itself. And that means the whole self, even the mental self.
Exactly right, because to the human organism, they're not separate pieces.
Mm-hmm.
They're all interconnected as one whole piece. So you can start anywhere in the human organism. You can start with counseling. You can start with spiritual direction. You can start with just silence and prayer. You can start with physical exercise. But they're all going to reconnect again back into a healthy, whole, living, pulsating organism.
I love that. Many roads to Mecca there.
Exactly.
So how does trauma actually get etched into the body? I know that we have you've talked about it a little bit in a very clinical way, but for someone who's still trying to wrap their mind around this and say they have a car accident, and so why is it that some people, is everyone affected by the car accident, or do some people more resilient, or how is it that sometimes things get etched in deeper than others?
Yeah, I believe that everybody gets affected by it. It's a matter of degree as to how they're affected. So you have 4 people in the same car, it's the same car accident. You could have 3 that have post-traumatic stress disorder and 1 who did not. And so then that becomes the big question, well, why didn't that one person do it? Well, there's a whole bunch of dynamics going on there in terms of the best research that I've seen suggests that the stronger psychosocial support you have after a traumatic event, the more you're capable of reducing post-trauma symptoms. So again, it's about being engaged in the relationship and being seen and heard and felt with other human beings. And the stronger that is, then the more you're capable of working through the psycho-emotional as well as the physical trauma. A good example of this would be how many soldiers I have worked with that have post-traumatic stress disorder, but have both of their arms and both of their legs. They are living through hell psycho-emotionally, and yet the soldiers who have lost an arm and a leg are actually healing fast.
Wow. It's a perceptual thing too.
Exactly right.
We're going right into another break, everyone. We'll be back in just a few moments. Please stay tuned as we continue this conversation with Dr. David Berceli. Be right back.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Live with medium Lisa Phoenix, Mediumship Messages and Musings, explores mediumship and all things metaphysical. Lisa Phoenix invites you to reach above and beyond your everyday experiences, to explore new dimensions in the spirit world. She will do live readings to connect callers to their loved ones in spirit, shares engaging stories and teachings from her own personal experience, and will have intriguing conversations with other mediums, spiritual teachers, and healers to help you understand the metaphysical world so you can connect to these forces in your day-to-day life. Join your host on this magical and metaphysical journey into the world of spirit every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.
Circle of Hearts Radio is a sanctuary on the airwaves. Join me, Grandmother Elia, in the circle on Sunday 2 p.m. Eastern as I share information to both enlighten and nourish your soul.
Are you trying to get from point A to point B and need a little advice? Connect with the counselors at OMTimes Advisors. Whether you're looking for a life coach or a spiritual intuitive, the advisors participating at advisors.omtimes.com were carefully chosen based on their gifts, skills, and professionalism. OMTimes Advisors, connecting you with the best advisors in the business. Free your mind with OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Welcome back from the break. Dr. Berceli, before we went into that break, you were just closing that thought about soldiers who you have worked with and how some soldiers had traumatic experiences during war, and they just could not break free of the mental torment they were in, while other soldiers had actually lost limbs from their body and were able to move forward. How does that happen? Why does that happen?
Well, it's sort of simple. When we see physical limitation in a human being, there's something actually to respond to. So there's sort of compassion, there's attention, they get rehab, they get an artificial limb. So they're constantly being taken care of, constantly being talked to, nurtured back into a healthy life. They teach them how to re-walk again or use their new arms or hands or whatever. Whereas somebody who has post-traumatic stress disorder and they have all their limbs and you see no physical illness at all, they completely walk through life almost invisible. Their illness is completely invisible, and yet there could be suffering horribly inside, and no attention is given to it. And then, of course, we say, well, it can't be that bad, or if they were more resilient, they wouldn't be in this state, etc. So they almost have an impediment from our social consciousness to have post-traumatic stress disorder, and then it just becomes an invisible illness.
That's very heartbreaking, and that's why we have such a high rate of suicide amongst our military personnel. It's very heartbreaking, and as well with our adolescents as well. Because
very true. That's so saddening when you see adolescent suicide increasing, and even the drug abuse of adolescents at this point increasing so high, because truly our society, at least here in the United States and most of the Western world, has really etched up our levels of daily anxiety, and yet we still haven't learned how do we calm the system down after we've put it through such stressful events throughout the regular day, and certainly for adolescents, even just in school.
I agree, and the only options we really have is either medication is really pushed quite strongly, or distraction.
Right, exactly right. And unfortunately, the children are starting to use both of those, distracting themselves and using medication when the distraction isn't working well enough.
Right. And so, in speaking about adolescents, let's go into a younger population and talk about traumas that are experienced in childhood, especially individuals who have experienced abuse. Now, I had an abusive childhood. Interestingly enough, a lot of my clients, surprisingly, have also had abusive childhoods. And I don't think it's as rare as people think and believe. I think it's more common. So someone who has had an abusive childhood, I know in your first book, The Revolutionary Trauma Release Process, you talked about how that can lead to being a traumatized adult.
Right. Well, think of it this way. I'm 62 years old. My father was in the Korean War. Now, he was traumatized, but during that time, they didn't know very much about trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. So he ended up becoming an active alcoholic for several years of his life. Then when he stopped drinking, he still sort of had an alcoholic personality. So I grew up in that environment. Now, he was not physically abusive to me, but I lived in fear much of my childhood. And so when I grew up and left there, I still lived in fear around people who drink or men who were strong. Sort of father figures to me were frightening rather than feeling safe and relational. Mm-hmm. And so I think that truly abuse takes many forms. Basically, it means I wasn't safe.
Yeah.
And so many people have many childhood experiences, and the worst that we see in our society for our adolescent children, unfortunately, is this bullying and cyberbullying.
Yes.
They feel terribly vulnerable and unsafe, and we're getting a lot of suicides from this. And so I would like to say that I think many people live through fear or terror or anxiety during childhood years. If it's not socially met and somehow received by the parents or safe figures, they will carry on that type of relationship and personality into adulthood.
And that's the tragedy of it, because then you can kind of, continue the cycle, but if you don't have it to give yourself, then you don't know how to teach it to your own children.
It's very clear that the cycle continues. Somebody who's sexually abused as a child will most often start having relationships after adolescence with sexually abusive people, because that's all they know in terms of relationship. They don't want that, but they don't know another type of person to choose. So they end up getting attracted to the very type of people that abuse them in the first place.
And so from your point of view, will TRE help to break those patterns?
It actually breaks the neurophysiological cycle of the dysfunction. Because think of the human body, the human organism. It's always capable of experiencing traumas or stressors, enduring them, surviving them. But when you learn to calm it down after the traumatic event is over, it actually develops sort of a knowing or an evolutionary process of becoming stronger. So yes, every human person does that. And the way that TRE breaks the cycle is it reactivates the calming effect of the nervous system, and then the body gets to learn, oh, I know how to get excited from that charge, and I know how to calm myself down after the charge. And once it completes the full cycle, it breaks the dysfunctional cycle.
I love that. It's so easy to do too. I mean, oh my goodness. Can you do me a favor and just please share with everyone how they can get in contact with you, your website, and I'm assuming that people can find your books on your website. Is that correct?
Yeah, everything I have that I've published so far is on my website. They can also get all of it on Amazon if they want. The website is traumaprevention.com. And also on that website, they can find people from all over the world who are licensed or certified TRE providers, so that they could find somebody in their area if they wanted to go to a person. There's listings of workshops on TRE all over the world, or certification and training programs on TRE. So all of it is there on that one website, and they should be able to pretty much find their way through it.
I love that. And how many countries is TRE available in?
It's in 40 countries right now.
Wow.
Yeah, and what I love about it, Sylvia, and this is what I started from the very beginning. When I was living in Africa, a mother came up to me one time, and she had like an 8th grade education. Her family had been severely traumatized. This was in Sudan, southern Sudan during the war. And she said, please teach me what I can do to help my children. And that was my imperative. I had to figure out a way to help this mother not feel hopeless and helpless, that she could feel empowered to help her family and her children with her limited knowledge and skill level. Once I figured this out, and I was then able to provide it to them, what I realized is that basically about 80% of the world's population is traumatized, and most of them are marginalized people.
Wow.
And they don't have access to therapy, clinicians, or expensive techniques. They need something that they can self-empower so that they can bring themselves out of trauma, because they're not most likely going to get somebody else to help them do it.
And that's the other thing I really love about this work, is that you have created something that is so accessible.
It has to be accessible, and you have to be able to replicate it easily, and it must be effective.
Yeah. And it is. It really is. For those of you listening, I do this process, and it's a beautiful work. I have to share real quick before we get to the end of the show. I had a client that was coming to see me, and I was using a different process with her. And she had experienced a lot of trauma in her past. And, she had seen me a couple of times, and each time it was very difficult for her my office is upstairs, to navigate going up and down the stairs. And so we were having this conversation. For some reason, something said, tell her about TRE. And so I showed her my book and I suggested she get it. She got the book. She didn't even get the DVD. She got the book. She started doing the exercises. And 3 weeks later, she came back and she could walk. She could stand up straight. She walked perfectly up and down my steps. And she was so grateful for the gift of TRE.
Thank you. That's a beautiful story. And what I like about it is it tells us how resilient the body is, and surprisingly, how much it can repair itself using its own mechanism.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just one more piece of evidence that the body truly is designed to heal itself. And this is how animals shake off their stress in nature too, right?
Yep. It's exactly what they do. And our only problem is we inhibit the shaking mechanism, whereas mammals in the wild allow it to occur freely. And that's why they don't have post-traumatic stress disorder.
That is fascinating. And that makes so much sense because even as a child, we're told to disown our emotional state.
Exactly. And disown our bodies by and large.
Definitely. Definitely. Wow. Well, Dr. Berceli, this has been a fantastic show. I want to thank you so much for joining me as we're coming to the very end, sadly. Everyone, please do take advantage of this amazing process. Get the DVD, get the book. You will not regret it. It will change your life and heal your world and heal your family with it as well. I just want to remind you all that I will be here again next week, Sunday evening. I have James Twyman joining me, who is the Peace Troubadour. That's what he's known as. And we're going to talk about the 50th anniversary of the Course in Miracles. Thank you for joining me and have a fantastic week. Love to you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Sylvia.